So today I'm going to walk you through all of the steps to build yourself a DIY animal shelter out of pallets. Originally this project started out as a garden bed. I bought treated pine sleepers from Bunnings and screwed them together to make up the frame. Here is my wife sanding it down so that it was nice and smooth. Here's a picture of the twins and I standing in front of it when it was a garden bed. We grew vegetables successfully there for a number of years before we lost interest in maintaining our own vegetable garden. Fast forward a few years and you can see the garden in the background there looking quite neglected. Then along came the goats. The decision to get rid of the garden bed and turn it into a goat house was partly because the garden bed was being neglected, but then the goats finished it off and ate all the plants. Goats will eat anything in sight. For this project, I didn't want to go out and spend a lot of money, so I really tried to use materials that I already had, could get for super cheap or even better for free. So you can see that I only had to buy a few of the raw materials from Bunnings. If you're doing this project, how much you end up spending will really depend on what suitable materials you have at home or can find for the cheap. Facebook Marketplace and Gumtree are great places to grab a bargain. This project does require a number of different power tools and hand tools, but the most important thing to have is a solid supply of child labour and plenty of beers. Well, hopefully they're your children. So the first step for this project is definitely to plan. You don't want to get halfway through and then realise that you forgot something, so definitely plan first. When you're planning the actual build, you want to consider things like the location of where it's going to go, how it's positioned in regards to the elements. Also keep in mind things such as council regulations regarding how close to a neighbouring fence it can be, and also what types of structures will require a permit. Fortunately, I didn't require a permit for mine. For the footing for this structure, I screwed some treated pine sleepers to the frame as flooring joists to lay the marine ply on. It's important to select the appropriate materials. In this case, the sleepers are sitting straight on the dirt, so I used treated pine, but I also sealed them with primer for added protection. So make sure that you carefully consider your materials and whether they're suitable for the long term. I chose to build this structure on a raised deck mainly because anybody who has goats would know goats like to be up high. They like to be up off the ground, away from the dirt and the bugs. It also helps to keep them dry and out of the water during heavy rains. I chose pallets for this project because not only were they free, but they were the perfect material to use because they're strong, light, modular, and beneficial for all seasons. They provide enough protection from the wind and the rain, but also allow airflow to keep the goats cool in the summer. And another thing that any goat owner will tell you is that goats love to get in the way. Here you can see mine sitting inside the footings, being a nuisance. I wanted to be able to hose the goat house out whenever it got dirty in there, so I chose a material that would be waterproof. I used sheets of 18mm marine ply for the flooring. I also gave this floor a slight slope away from the entrance towards the back to help with water egress. Next, I had to seal the deck using a suitable paint. I used a leftover primer sealer for this layer. Priming is important because it seals the raw timber from moisture and termites and protects the structure for years to come. Then I painted 3 coats of UV resistant paint. I think it was some leftover Dulux weather shield that I had laying around from an old project. Even though the goats would have fit had I made the structure 1 pallet tall, I wanted to be able to walk inside the structure for maintenance and cleaning, which is why I made it 2 pallets tall in the end. I left a 1 pallet wide gap for the doorway. I decided to keep it an open door, but left enough material there that I could put a locking door on if I wanted to, but I never got around to it. So I didn't screw the pallets straight into the deck because I wanted to be able to hose the goat house out so that all of the water and goat poop and whatever could be flushed out between the pallets and the deck. So I used some 35 by 90 treated pine offcuts to lift the pallets up from the deck. You can see them painted green sitting underneath the pallets. They're anchored to the deck with liquid nails and long treated pine screws. I then securely anchored the pallets into those timbers. In order to join and brace the pallets, I secured them using bits of treated pine which I had left over. I think they were just offcuts. You can see them here. They're the green pieces of timber laying across the ends of the pallets. I used a bunch of different fasteners for this: brackets, screws, liquid nails, whatever I had at hand. And here it is after I built up the walls using the pallets. I ended up using 14 pine pallets altogether. Then, just like with the deck, I had to prime the pallet structure. It was quite difficult painting the pallets because there were parts that a paintbrush just couldn't reach. So I ended up resorting to using a paint spray gun. It was quite tedious, but I think the end result came up pretty good. I then painted 3 layers of Dulux Weather Shield paint. This time I opted for a grey colour, woodland grey I think it was, to match my fence and garden shed. I also decided to raise the roof. I created a gap between the top of the pallet structure and the roof to allow airflow, but also in a storm to make sure it doesn't fly off like a kite. Here I am screwing the battens into the rafters. I decided to do a decorative cut on the rafters called a plum cut. That's where I cut the exposed ends of the rafters at an angle, because goats like it a bit fancy. So here's one of my goats, Margie, trying to get all up in my business. When you build your goat house, make sure you keep your goats away or they'll end up knocking over paint cans, chewing on anything or running away with your tools. So here's the inside of the structure once the roofing frame was put on. This is where I sealed and painted it. It might be hard to see from this picture, but the roof has a 5-degree fall towards the fence. This is the minimum angle required for ColourBond sheeting so that the water runs off it and away from the entrance to the goat house. We were originally planning on painting the deck all the woodland grey as well, but then we thought it might look a bit too dark and be too dark inside the house for the goats, so we decided to just leave it this light green colour. But then we'd run out of green, so we couldn't paint the entire structure green. You might notice the dodgy painting on the bottom there. That was the child labour I mentioned earlier. Oh well, you get what you pay for, and I didn't pay them anything, so. And as I mentioned before, be mindful of your council's regulations regarding how close structures like this can be to the fence. We abided our local council rules and spaced it accordingly. It also still allows access to the fence and the rear of the structure should any maintenance or repairs be needed later on. And so if it wasn't the goats being all up in my business, it was the kids. They enjoyed sitting on the roof frame and using it as a jungle gym. As I mentioned before about the slope that was on the roof, you don't want water to pool on the roof and have time to penetrate any of the sheets overlaps or through the roofing screws, rubber washers. You want the rainwater to run straight off the back, away from the entrance. Also, the roof has a 350mm overhang on all sides for extra protection. Lastly, I used ColourBond sheeting for the roof using the recommended sheet overlap and spacing for the roofing screws. I then sealed all screw heads with roof and gutter silicone for extra protection. And here's the goats enjoying their new home. We would pop a bale of hay in there periodically for them to destroy, and they loved it. It was super easy to hose out when I needed to as well. As you may know, we don't have goats anymore, but the kids now use the goat house to play in, and as soon as our new pup Aussie is big enough, it'll be his new digs. And lastly, I'd like to say thank you for watching. I hope you found the video helpful in planning your build, or at least a little bit entertaining. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, there's goat merch available at my store, link in the description.